What would you do if the HOA called the cops on your wife before she even stepped out of her truck? The day my wife came home, I thought only the mountain wind would greet her. Instead, the HOA showed up, calling the cops and accusing her of faking her military ID right at my own ranch gate. What they didn't know was that the woman they were targeting had authority over the very lake they'd been violating. And from that moment on, everything changed. The wind at the north gate always felt sharper than anywhere else on the ranch. It came off the Wyoming prairie dry and restless, dragging dust across the cattle guard and rattling the old steel gate my father welded himself. I was leaning on that gate, boots planted in the gravel, when I saw a flash of orange on the ridge road. Her truck. For a heartbeat, I thought it was some county rig or a lost tourist from the subdivision. Then the sun caught that familiar chipped paint, and my heart just about punched through my ribs. The orange pickup bounced along the dirt easement, moving boxes strapped in the back under a blue tarp that snapped in the wind. 24 months of video calls, rushed weekends, and trying to fall asleep staring at a frozen screen instead of her face were supposed to end today. No more talking to a glow on my kitchen table. No more empty chair across from me at breakfast. Just Sarah, home for good, rolling up Holloway Ranch Road in that loud old truck that always sounded like it was coming apart, but never quite did. I'd spent 3 days getting ready for this moment. Swept mouse droppings out of the mudroom, scrubbed the pine floors until my back seized, tightened the porch rail she always said would dump somebody into the flower bed one day. I even dug out the good towels my mother used to hide for company. For once, it felt like something in my life might actually be pointed in the right direction. The pickup turned off the county road and onto my rutted track, dust boiling up behind it. It clanged over the cattle guard and crept the last few yards toward the gate. I stepped closer, palm resting on the warm metal, squinting against the glare. She saw me. Even from there, I could tell from the way she straightened in the seat, one hand lifting from the wheel in that crooked half-salute she liked to use when she was teasing me. Short brown hair tucked behind one ear, sunglasses on, chin tilted like she owned every inch of sky. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Army, 8 years of service and still, somehow, the same woman who once fell asleep on my shoulder in a broken-down Chevy outside a county fair. The truck rolled to a stop just inside the fence line, gravel crunching under her tires. I swung the gate wider and the engine cut off. The sudden quiet made the world feel bigger. Wind in the dry grass, a distant bawl from one of the steers, the faint slap of water against the rocks down at Hollow Reservoir. She hopped out, boots hitting dirt with a solid thud, and for a few seconds, it was just us. Her, the truck, my father's gate, and 80 acres of Holloway land stretching behind me to the glitter of blue where the dam held the lake like a sheet of glass. "Hey, cowboy," she said. I didn't answer. I just pulled her in so fast we both staggered, her laugh muffled against my shoulder. She smelled like dust and diesel and that clean soap she always used. For a man who'd spent most of the last decade talking to cows and fence posts, it felt like someone had finally put the missing piece back where it belonged. "You're really here," I muttered into her hair. "Last I checked." She leaned back, studying my face like she was checking for damage. "You look older. You look bossier." "That's just the rank." She grinned, and something tight in my chest loosened. Behind her, the boxes in the bed were marked in thick black marker. Kitchen, books, uniforms. One just said, "Stuff that keeps me sane." I'd seen that same box over a grainy video call once, half a world away. Seeing it sitting in my driveway, with my crooked fence in the background, made my throat sting. "House is clean," I said, clearing my throat. "Mostly. I even fixed the squeaky bedroom door." "Remy Holloway fixing a hinge?" She let out a low whistle. If I'd known that's what it took, I'd have volunteered for another tour. I opened my mouth to tell her about the roast in the crockpot, about the wildflowers in the chipped vase on the table, when a sound split the quiet. A car door slammed down the hill. The sharp thunk bounced off the stone pillars at the subdivision entrance. Willow Ridge Estates carved into fake rock in big white letters. I hadn't even noticed the silver SUV idling by the inside of their black iron gate. Now its driver's door swung shut, and a woman in a bright pink cardigan climbed out like she was stepping onto a stage. Sarah followed my gaze. "Friend of yours?" she asked softly. "HOA president," I said. "Bethany Coldwell. She runs Willow Ridge like it's a kingdom, and somebody forgot to tell her the boarders stop at my fence." Bethany moved fast for someone in heeled sandals. Phone in one hand, clipboard in the other, blonde bob cut sharp enough to slice paper. Her cardigan was the kind of pink you didn't see in this valley, unless you were standing in the makeup aisle at the hardware store. She marched up the blacktop, heels clicking, eyes locked on the orange truck like it was some kind of invasion. She didn't pause at the property marker where my rusty barbed wire met their perfect steel. She came right up to the gate and stopped just shy of letting her sandals touch my dust. "Excuse me," she called, voice going hard. "What exactly is this situation?" I kept my hand on the gate. "Afternoon, Bethany. Just welcoming my wife home." Her gaze flicked to Sarah and back to me. "This vehicle is not authorized to stage at the entrance to Willow Ridge," she said, jabbing her clipboard toward the truck. "Commercial trucks are prohibited on association roads. It's in the bylaws." Sarah pushed her sunglasses up on her head. "Ma'am, I drove up my husband's ranch road. Didn't touch your pavement till I turned in. And this isn't commercial." Bethany gave a little laugh that had no humor in it. "Oversized tires, racks, decals. If it looks like a work truck, it's a work truck. And work trucks do not sit in full view of my homeowners. You're blocking the visual corridor." "The what?" I asked. "The sight line from our gate to the water," she snapped. "We have standards here, Mr. Holloway." "This is my gate," I said. "My land. Her truck." Bethany ignored that. She lifted her phone and fired off 3 quick pictures, front of the pickup, plates, then Sarah's face. Her thumbs were already moving, typing fast. "Do you mind?" Sarah asked, voice still calm. "Documentation," Bethany said briskly. She spoke just loud enough for the nearest neighbors at the gate to hear. "Suspicious military-style vehicle, unknown occupants, possible misuse of common access road." Faces were starting to appear between the iron bars up the hill. Men in golf shirts, women in yoga pants, all of them staring down at us like we were some kind of exhibit. "Suspicious?" I repeated. "She's my wife." "That's what everyone says," Bethany replied. "We had a man last year claim to be a firefighter, so he could park his hideous truck on the street. Turned out he did landscaping and liked the attention." Her eyes slid back to Sarah, cool and assessing. "I checked our records. We have no active duty resident registered at this address. We take stolen valor very seriously." Heat crawled up my neck. "You're calling her a liar." "I'm saying this community has standards," Bethany answered. "I will not have unknown individuals in costume using this ranch as a staging area to intimidate my homeowners." Sarah's shoulders stayed loose, but her fingers flexed once at her sides. I knew that look. I'd seen it right before tough conversations and ugly briefings. "Bethany," I said, fighting to keep my tone steady, "you're out of line." "Oh, I don't think so." She smiled then, small and sure. "You'll be pleased to know I've already contacted the sheriff, and county zoning, and water control. They can decide who belongs here and who doesn't." As if the air itself agreed with her, a distant siren wound up on the highway beyond the ridge. A few beats later, red and blue flashed between the cottonwoods as a patrol car turned off onto Willow Ridge Drive. Another set of lights followed behind it. This was supposed to be the day Sarah carried boxes over our threshold. Instead, she stood beside her truck at my father's old gate, while squad cars rolled in like we were some kind of threat. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of hot engines, sun-baked sage, and the cool breath of the lake. Sarah took a slow breath and squared her shoulders, watching the cruisers approach. Bethany folded her arms, pink cardigan blazing against the stone pillars, already composing whatever story she'd tell when the officers stepped out. And for the first time, clear and cold, it hit me. Before my wife had even set foot on my porch, our new life together was being treated like a crime scene. The first cruiser eased to a stop beside the gate, tires crunching on gravel. Sheriff's Deputy Lionel Cole stepped out, hat pulled low against the afternoon glare. I knew Lionel. Everyone in the North Valley knew him. He was the kind of man who wrote warnings instead of tickets if he saw your trailer lights were out. But he also had a way of squinting at you that made you fix those lights before sundown. The second cruiser door opened and a younger officer, new guy, city face, hurried to catch up. "What's the emergency, Mrs. Coldwell?" Lionel asked, his voice steady, cautious, already tired. Bethany pointed dramatically at Sarah's truck, like she'd just uncovered a cartel shipment. "This vehicle has been staging at the entrance to Willow Ridge for the past 15 minutes. Large tactical frame, oversized tires, unmarked equipment mounts. The occupants refused to identify themselves and may be posing as military personnel." Lionel's eyes flicked from the truck to Sarah to me. He didn't draw conclusions fast. That was one thing I respected about him. "Ma'am," he said, turning toward Sarah, "is this your vehicle?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied calmly, sliding her sunglasses into her shirt collar. "Registered to me. I arrived 5 minutes ago." Bethany gasped like Sarah had confessed to arson. "She's lying," she said, clutching her clipboard tighter. "I saw them idling near the gate. She's been circling the neighborhood all morning. I have photos." She held up her phone. The younger deputy leaned in to look, nodding too fast, the kind of rookie who believed whatever the loudest person said. Lionel barely glanced at the screen. "Mrs. Coldwell," he said slowly, "this looks like she's pulling up your road." "It's an access road," she snapped. "A shared access road. Our HOA holds an easement that grants us the right to enforce community safety. That truck is a threat to the visual harmony of the neighborhood." I actually blinked. Sarah looked sideways at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "Visual harmony," I repeated. Bethany lifted her chin. "You laugh now, Mr. Holloway, but our bylaws specify—" "Ma'am," Lionel interrupted gently, "this isn't a violation hearing. This is a police response." Sarah remained still, hands at her sides, eyes level. She looked like she was standing for inspection, her posture steady as the fence posts behind us. "Deputy," Bethany continued, stepping closer to him, "I need you to understand something. This couple has already shown signs of hostility. They refuse to acknowledge HOA authority. And this," she gestured sharply at the pickup, "this is clearly a working vehicle being disguised as personal transport. We cannot allow unauthorized equipment near the lake. It compromises property values and safety." The younger deputy scribbled something in a small notebook. Lionel didn't. "Let's take this one piece at a time," he said. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Bethany's eyes lit up. She thought she was being validated. "Bethany Coldwell, HOA President for Willow Ridge Estates. 12 years in service." She said it like she expected applause. "All right," Lionel said patiently. "And you believe this woman is impersonating military personnel?" "I don't believe," Bethany said sharply. "I know. I checked our community registry. No active duty spouse is listed under this address. And look at her. Look at that vehicle. No real officer would move into a ranch like this. It doesn't align with federal housing allowances." Sarah let out a quiet breath through her nose. Not a sigh. More like she'd made a note. "Ma'am," Lionel said gently, turning toward her now. "Your name?" Sarah Mitchell, she replied. And your relationship here? I'm Remy's wife, she said simply. Bethany let out a laugh that cracked like cold glass. That is not legally documented anywhere in our HOA records. I checked every file. I check everything. And that's the problem, I muttered, too low for her to hear. Bethany's voice grew louder. I asked them to identify themselves. They refused. That truck is not permitted within 50 feet of our gated entry. It's frightening homeowners and blocking the view corridor. That again, Sarah whispered to me. A corner of her mouth twitched upward, just for a second. Lionel rested his hand on his belt, not aggressive, just grounding himself. Mrs. Mitchell, did you refuse to identify yourself? No, Deputy, Sarah answered. I wasn't asked. That's a lie, Bethany snapped. I asked you directly. I said, You took pictures, Sarah said calmly. You accused me. You never asked. I could tell Lionel was weighing every word. That was his way. But the young deputy was already shifting his stance, ready to escalate. Deputy, he said, should we request ID now? If she's impersonating, I never said impersonating, Bethany lied smoothly. I said suspicious military associations, suspicious behavior, suspicious vehicle. Suspicious wife, Sarah murmured under her breath. I heard it. Lionel probably heard it too. Then Bethany pointed her clipboard right at Sarah's chest. Deputy, in my official capacity as HOA president, I demand you detain her until her identity is verified. My jaw locked so hard it ached. Detain? I repeated. On what grounds? Bethany didn't look at me. Not once. On the grounds that our community has standards, Mr. Holloway, and unknown military vehicles cannot simply roll onto a ranch touching our property and expect us to pretend everything is fine. Her voice rose, pitched high enough for the neighbors behind the gate to hear. Heads nodded. Phones filmed. Sarah inhaled once, a slow, controlled breath soldiers used when they were deciding how much truth to give the room. Deputy, she said softly, I'm happy to show ID. Ma'am, Lionel said, nodding. That would help settle things down. Oh, I look forward to this, Bethany said, folding her arms. Let's see who you really are. Sarah reached for her back pocket, fingers brushing the worn leather of her wallet. Dust swirled around her boots as the wind shifted again. The younger deputy leaned forward. The neighbors pressed closer to the bars of their pristine gate. Bethany's smirk sharpened, and I felt it. That taut quiet that comes a breath before a storm breaks. Sarah flipped open her wallet. But instead of handing anything over yet, she looked up, right at Bethany, and asked, Before I show this, Mrs. Coldwell, did you actually check any county maps before calling us trespassers? Or did you just assume you owned the valley? Bethany blinked once, confusion slicing through her confidence. For the first time all afternoon, she didn't have an answer. Sarah held the wallet open in her hand, steady as bedrock. The deputies watched her, waiting. Bethany's mouth twitched, that bright pink cardigan trembling like she was trying to figure out whether she'd just been insulted or challenged. For a moment, the prairie went quiet. No wind, no birds, just the sound of grit rolling across the cattle guard. Then Lionel cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you're ready. Sarah nodded, but she didn't look away from Bethany. The question she'd asked wasn't really about maps, and everyone in that moment seemed to know it. It was about boundaries, real ones, drawn in county books and filed under Holloway, and invisible ones, the kind people like Bethany pretended existed. But before Sarah could lift the card, something in my chest tightened, pulling me backward in time. The gravel under my boots felt suddenly like the gravel from a different day. A hotter one, meaner one. Years ago, when county officials stood on the same dirt claiming my family's reservoir wasn't structurally concerning. I remembered my father yelling across this very gate, telling them the dam needed reinforcement before winter melt. I remembered them patting him on the back, saying the geology report was within acceptable tolerance, and driving off in polished trucks that left us in a swirl of dust and dismissal. 3 months later, the West Spillway failed. Not a catastrophic burst, nothing that made the news, but a partial collapse that drained half the reservoir, flooded our north pasture, and drowned the field where my father had grown alfalfa every summer since I could walk. He was never the same afterward. The land had held him up his entire life. Watching it buckle broke something in him. He died 2 winters after that. Heart just gave out. Folks said it was age. I always thought it was grief. I blinked hard as the memory dissolved, replaced by the present. Deputies waiting, neighbors whispering behind the gate, and Sarah, my Sarah, standing in the same sun that once shined on my father's last fight. "Remy?" Her voice was quiet enough that only I heard it. "You okay?" I nodded, though the truth was heavier. She knew it anyway. She always did. Bethany mistook my silence for submission. "Deputy," she said briskly, "I'd like your report to reflect that the resident is uncooperative and possibly agitated. This is typical behavior when confronted with authority in rural areas." Lionel raised one eyebrow. I'd seen that look before. It was the look he gave teenagers speeding past the diner, or tourists who tried to pet bison like they were Labradors. "Mrs. Coldwell," he said, "I'm going to ask you to let me handle the scene." "I am handling the scene," she insisted. "That's the problem." Sarah's fingers closed around my wrist, a light touch, grounding me. She stepped half an inch closer to the deputies, shielding me with just her presence. Not aggressive, protective, the way she had when she talked to new soldiers under her command, or to kids lost at the county fair. "Deputy," she said, "I'll show you whatever identification you need. I just wanted clarification on who exactly has authority to accuse my husband of trespassing on land his family settled before Willow Ridge existed." Bethany bristled. "Our HOA surveys clearly show easement." "No, they don't." The words left my mouth before I even realized I'd spoken them. Bethany snapped toward me, scandalized. "Excuse me?" "I said no, they don't," I repeated, voice steadier now. "Because the county hasn't issued a new survey in 10 years. Your developer just drew a pretty map for real estate brochures and called it legal." Bethany stared at me like I'd spoken another language. The younger deputy paused his note-taking. Lionel's jaw shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to know he was listening. "I have the original plats in my barn office," I continued, surprising myself with how firm I sounded. "Easement for this road is shared, not surrendered. The HOA can use it. It can't own it." Bethany laughed, too loud. "That is not how property law works." "It is in this valley," Lionel said quietly. Bethany faltered. She turned to the younger deputy for backup, but he looked suddenly unsure, pen frozen over his pad. Sarah studied me, her expression softening. "You've been carrying this a long time," she murmured, not as a question, but as fact. My throat tightened again. "It's just land," I muttered. But we both knew it wasn't. Land was history, inheritance, wounds, victories. It was the place a man either stood or disappeared. Bethany shook off her hesitation and pointed at Sarah again. "Deputy, whatever this emotional display is, it is irrelevant. I demand identification now." Sarah finally lifted her wallet, but paused again as Lionel adjusted his stance. Something in his eyes told me he wasn't just processing the scene. He was assessing Bethany's insistence, the tension in the crowd, the flash of trauma he'd probably seen flicker across my face. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gently, "if you'd show me your ID, we can settle this quickly." Sarah nodded. But before she moved, Bethany leaned in and hissed, "And if that ID doesn't match what you claim, there will be consequences. Impersonating military personnel near a water facility is a federal offense. I will personally ensure—" Sarah straightened. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was absolute, like a soldier rising to full height before delivering orders no one dared challenge. She held her wallet between two fingers, but instead of handing it to Lionel, she looked at Bethany with quiet, razor-sharp focus. "You said earlier I was circling your neighborhood. When exactly did you see that?" Bethany blinked. "This morning, near the east access point," Sarah tilted her head. "Interesting. Because I wasn't in Wyoming this morning." A murmur rippled through the crowd behind the gate. Bethany's lips parted. "Well, perhaps it was yesterday. I was in Nevada yesterday," Sarah said softly. "And the day before that, Colorado. So I'm curious which woman you photographed and decided was me." Bethany paled for half a second before recovering. I must have misremembered." Sarah let the silence grow, stretching thin like a wire ready to snap. "You didn't misremember," she finally said. "You assumed, and you accused." Bethany swallowed hard. "Now," Sarah said at last, turning back toward Lionel, "you can see my ID." And as her hand began to pass the card forward, the wind shifted again, carrying the sharp scent of lake water and something else. Anticipation, maybe. That moment when the valley seemed to hold its breath because it knew everything was about to turn. The leather wallet opened like a door into another world. The sunlight caught the edge of the plastic sleeve, and for a heartbeat, the card inside gleamed. A flash of silver, a crest, an eagle spread in unmistakable authority. Lionel leaned in. The younger deputy stopped writing mid-stroke. Even the neighbors pressed against the gate rails, suddenly silent. Sarah held the card steady, offering it without theatrics, without arrogance, just certainty. Lionel took it first. His brows lowered as he read. Then they rose. Then he looked up at her like he was recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the situation. "Lieutenant Colonel," he murmured. The younger deputy's mouth fell open. "United States Army Corps of Engineers. Sir, ma'am, Colonel." Bethany stiffened. "What? What does it say?" "Let me see it." Lionel ignored her. He swallowed once, turned to me, then back to Sarah. His posture shifted, not military, but respectful in a way you couldn't fake. "Colonel Mitchell," he said, voice deeper now. "If I had known—" "You didn't," Sarah replied gently, "and I understand you were just responding to a call." But Bethany was already lunging forward, heels scraping on gravel. "She forged it," she snapped. "Anyone can laminate a card. Deputy, look at her vehicle. That doesn't look like something a colonel drives. And this address. Colonels don't live in ranch houses. This is absurd. Check the watermark. Check." Lionel held up a hand. "Mrs. Coldwell, please step back." "No!" Her voice pitched higher, cracking like something brittle. "Do you realize what I reported? I said suspicious military presence near the lake. Near our lake. That reservoir supplies all of Willow Ridge. If she's here illegally, that is a federal threat. You have to detain her." "Mrs. Coldwell," Lionel repeated firmly. "Step back." She didn't. Instead, she jabbed a finger at the dam in the distance, the afternoon sun glinting off its concrete curve. "That lake is under HOA protection. She has no business being near it. None." Sarah tilted her head, and I saw a flicker of something pass through her expression. Not anger, not smugness. Recognition. Understanding exactly how deep Bethany's ignorance ran. "Mrs. Coldwell," she said quietly, "the lake you're pointing at, that reservoir, is regulated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's impossible, Bethany snapped. The HOA maintains the walking paths. Therefore, we manage the shoreline. That isn't how jurisdiction works, Sarah replied, not raising her voice. And even if it were, you filed a complaint claiming a military imposter was attempting to access federally regulated water infrastructure. She gestured calmly to the ID in Lionel's hand. I'm the one who signs off on the annual safety assessments for dams just like Hollow Reservoir. Lionel inhaled sharply. The younger deputy actually stepped back. Bethany blinked. The annual what? The safety assessments, Sarah repeated. For the dam that feeds your lake, the one your developer rerouted 2 years ago without a federal permit. It was the valley itself that seemed to react. The wind lifting, the dust stirring, the lake flashing, as though even the water understood the weight of what had just been spoken. Bethany's face drained of color. For the first time, she didn't look irritated or self-important. She looked scared. That's not true, she whispered. The developer assured us. I've seen the filings, Sarah said. Or rather, the lack of filings. And now that I know calls have been made claiming suspicious military activity, and that those calls were made by someone exercising unauthorized oversight over federal water assets. Well, she turned slightly, addressing Lionel. I'm sure your office understands the implications. Lionel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yes, ma'am, he said. I do. Behind the gate, someone muttered, Oh, my lord. Another voice whispered, She called the cops on a colonel. The younger deputy swallowed audibly. Sheriff's not going to believe this. Bethany took a step back, her clipboard dropping to her shin. This is a misunderstanding. I was protecting the community. You thought the worst, Sarah said softly. Without evidence, without jurisdiction, and without respect. The breeze carried the smell of lake water and dust and something else now, shame, thick and choking. Lionel handed the ID back with both hands. Colonel Mitchell, he said, on behalf of the department, I apologize. We had no idea we were dealing with someone of your position. Sarah shook her head. You're doing your job, Deputy, but I'd like to request something moving forward. Anything, ma'am. That you verify future calls before escalating them. It seems Mrs. Coldwell has a habit of over-reporting. Bethany's head snapped up. I do nothing of the sort. I maintain property values. But no one was listening to her anymore. Lionel nodded to Sarah, then to me. You two are clear. No violations, no concerns. Then his tone hardened. Not cruel, just firm. Mrs. Coldwell, I need you to stay right here while I take a formal statement. False reports are a serious matter. My reports are not false, she squeaked. Sarah stepped back beside me. Her hand brushed mine. Not grabbing, not clinging. Just a touch. Simple. Steady. Like she was anchoring me again. You all right? She asked quietly. I think so, I said. And for the first time since her truck came down the ridge, I actually meant it. Behind us, Bethany tried to sputter something about HOA rights and suspicious behavior, but her words tangled in the air, flimsy now that the truth stood beside me in scuffed boots and an old leather wallet. The deputies led her aside. Neighbors scattered, suddenly fascinated by their shoes or their phones. The pink cardigan that once looked like armor now looked like a costume. As Sarah closed her wallet, the last bit of sunlight caught the embossed eagle again, and for one strange, quiet moment, I felt the valley exhale, the way it does after a storm breaks, but before the thunder admits it's over. But storms don't end that neatly in Wyoming. They just circle around the ridge and come back uglier. Sarah rested her hand on my arm. Let's get inside, she said softly. We'll unpack. We'll have a quiet night. We've earned one. We tried. God knows we tried. I carried her boxes into the cabin until the stars came out. Her books, her uniforms folded sharp as new bills, her framed picture of us from a rodeo in Cheyenne. She teased me for overwrapping everything in newspaper. I teased her for labeling a box simply Miss like that meant anything to anyone. For a few hours, it felt normal. Our version of normal, anyway. Two people trying to stitch distance and time back into something like a life. But the next morning, normal ended at the front gate. Sarah and I were drinking coffee on the porch when a sharp thunk hit the wood post near the steps. We both stiffened before realizing what it was. A blue HOA violation envelope slapped onto the fence. At 6:12 a.m., Sarah opened it while I rinsed out my mug. Her eyebrows arched in disbelief. "Dust emissions from Ranch Road," she read aloud, "causing visibility obstruction and nuisance to Willow Ridge residents." I took the notice and stared at it. Dust emissions, on a ranch, in Wyoming. Another thunk sounded from outside. Sarah and I both looked up. A second envelope fluttered against the gate, almost identical. Fence aesthetics not meeting community harmony standards. My jaw tightened. That's been my fence for 30 years. "Well," Sarah murmured, "apparently it's disharmonious." We tried to laugh, but neither of us managed it. Before I could head outside, my phone buzzed, a notification from the Willow Ridge Neighborhood app, which I wasn't even a member of. A public post, visible to the whole valley. "Residents, please remain cautious. Vehicle from yesterday's incident still present. Unconfirmed reports of military intimidation tactics. Avoid ranch perimeter until further notice." Under it were comments, little icons of people I'd waved to at the feed store or nodded at in the post office. Thought she seemed aggressive. Why move here if she wants secrecy? Is the husband involved too? Sarah read over my shoulder. They don't know anything about us. They think they do, I said. Bethany spoon-fed them a story. Sarah closed the app and set my phone aside like it was something that needed cooling down. Let's give it a day. People calm down when no crisis shows up. But people didn't calm down. By noon, 3 more violation notices were taped to the gate. By sunset, anonymous notes were tucked under the windshield of Sarah's truck, accusing her of abusing her authority. The next morning, we woke to find a letter taped right to our front door. Not the gate, not the fence, but the house itself. That line had never been crossed before. Unauthorized livestock activity. Livestock proximity to HOA view, corridor. Unapproved acoustic disturbances at sunrise. I stared at the list, each claim more ridiculous than the last. My cattle had been on that land before half these residents were even born. My rooster crowed at dawn. My well pump clicked like every other pump in every other ranch from here to Cody. But the one line that gutted me was the last. Continued disturbances may result in recommendation for removal from the shared valley community. I felt something in my chest crack, quietly, like an old hinge giving way. Sarah touched my back. Remy, look at me. I told you, I said, voice rough. They're gonna run us out like they did my father. First it's dust, then it's aesthetics, then it's zoning. Then one morning you wake up, and the place you've lived your whole life isn't yours anymore. That's not happening, she said firmly. You don't know how fast this can snowball. I know exactly how fast things snowball, she replied. I've spent years reading complaints that started with petty accusations and ended with major investigations. And I know something else. None of this is legal. But I shook my head and stepped away. I've seen this play out. Folks like Bethany, they don't lose. They wait, they tighten the rope, and they pull. And my breath caught. I'm tired, Sarah. I'm real tired of fighting ghosts. She watched me for a long moment. No judgment, no pity, just seeing me, seeing everything I tried not to show. Then she said, "Do you really think I came home just to watch you get run over?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, while I sat at the table staring at violation envelopes spread like fallen leaves, she moved quietly around the cabin, closing windows, pulling blinds, putting away the last of her uniforms. When she finally sat across from me, she folded her hands and said, "If you want to move, we'll move. If you want to sell the ranch, we'll sell. If you want to stay, we'll stay. But we are not making that decision while you're scared." "I'm not scared," I whispered. "You're terrified," she said gently. "And that's okay. But hear me clearly. We're not done." "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, voice barely above the hum of the refrigerator. "People like Bethany think paperwork is power. They think bylaws and complaints and fake surveys can bury a man alive." I swallowed. "They buried my father." Her eyes softened. "And we're not letting them bury you." For a moment, everything in the room felt still. Even the old wall clock seemed to hold its breath. Then she said the sentence that would change the entire course of the fight. "Remy, if they want a war of paperwork, then they've picked the wrong soldier." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Outside, the night pressed against the cabin windows, dark, quiet, wide as the whole valley. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of water trickling from the spillway at Hollow Reservoir. It had always been a soothing sound to me. Tonight, it sounded like a warning. Sarah stood from the table and disappeared down the hallway. A moment later, she returned with her laptop under one arm and a leather tube of survey maps under the other. She set both on the table with the same calm precision she used whenever she planned something important, something complicated, something she didn't intend to lose. She opened her laptop, the screen casting a cool blue glow across the wooden cabin walls. Dust motes drifted lazily through the light, like tiny spirits watching what we were about to do. Then she clicked, "New folder. Operation Dry Creek." I swallowed. "You already had the name ready?" She shrugged. "Naming an operation is half the battle." Feels ominous. It should. She pulled the ties on the leather tube and slid out a handful of rolled maps, yellowed at the edges, creased from years of folding and unfolding. She unrolled them across the table. County waterway plans, historic maps from before Willow Ridge existed, plats showing the original ranch boundaries back when barbed wire was new to the west. Her fingers traced the contour lines of the valley like she was reading a language. Maybe she was. Sarah always understood land differently than I did. I felt it. She read it. "Look here," she said, tapping a point where the access road curved. "This jogging path the HOA claims is theirs. It crosses your private easement. That means they're using your land without permission." I blinked. Since when? Since the developer put it in. And guess what? The HOA never filed the required secondary easement request with the county. They never asked me for permission either. They didn't think they needed to. She clicked through county records faster than I could follow. Screens of scanned documents, email correspondence, old filings from 10 years ago. "Here," she said, turning the laptop toward me. "The HOA installed decorative lights along the retaining wall by the lake. Yeah, I remember. They got some landscaping guy to fancy it up. It's illegal." I choked. "What?" "Those lights were drilled into the slope above the dam intake. That violates state safety guidelines. Only certified contractors with an approved plan can modify infrastructure near a spillway." "Well, that'll be news to them," I muttered. "Remy, the more I look, the worse this gets." She opened another file. "They expanded the drainage path 2 years ago. No permit, no review. If the water level spikes during spring melt, the overflow won't follow the engineered route. It'll follow the HOA's landscaped shortcut. That could flood the lower basin. That could flood Willow Ridge's fancy clubhouse. I stared at her. They did all that without checking anything? They thought they owned the valley, she said gently. Same way Bethany marched up to you like she had authority over federal water assets. I leaned back, rubbing my face with both hands. Sarah, all these years I thought I was one gust of wind from losing this ranch. Turns out they're the ones standing on sand. She smiled. Not triumph, not vengeance. Something steadier, something earned. Paperwork is truth, Remy. It's the one weapon that doesn't miss. She stood and walked to the old filing cabinet against the wall. The thing belonged in a museum, dented metal, a drawer that never closed right, but it held 90 years of Holloway land documents. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick binder. Water rights, Holloway Ranch. She dropped it beside the maps. Dust puffed up in a cloud. These are your father's, she said softly. He kept everything. I sat beside her and opened the binder. Pages of deeds, signatures from men long dead, copies of agreements that shaped our valley. My father's handwriting in the margins, tight, upright script, correcting dates or adding clarifications. I felt something sharp in my chest. Not pain. Memory. Sarah placed her hand over mine. He was fighting this battle alone. You don't have to. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I squeezed her hand instead. Then she turned back to the laptop. Next question. Why would Bethany escalate so fast? Accusing a stranger of impersonating military personnel is extreme. Calling water control is extreme. Something scared her into overreacting. I frowned. Scared her? Yes. Reaction that strong doesn't come from pride. It comes from fear. She tapped the reservoir on a map. I think Bethany knows the HOA cut corners with their landscaping projects. Maybe she got warnings. Maybe she's scared of a federal inspection. If someone from the Corps, someone like me, shows up, that entire development could be fined. That would ruin her little empire. Exactly. Sarah leaned back, piecing it all together. She saw a truck she didn't recognize, with rack mounts and equipment boxes, and she panicked. She thought the Corps sent someone undercover to investigate. I stared at her. You're saying she wasn't attacking us. She was defending herself. Her power, Sarah corrected. Her image, her control. The kettle clicked as it cooled on the stove. The cabin creaked under a gust of wind. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted, low and distant. Sarah flipped to a fresh page in her notebook. She began writing quickly. Here's the plan, she said. We gather evidence, old surveys, modern maps, drone photos, violation patterns, record of harassment, misuse of public agencies. We package it cleanly and deliver it at the hearing. What hearing? She slid her notebook toward me. At the top of the page, she'd written, County Water and Land Use Review Request, Draft. You're filing a review? I asked, stunned. No, she said calmly. We are, tomorrow. I shook my head. Bethany doesn't know what's coming. Sarah met my eyes, steady as ever. Remy, she picked this fight, but we're ending it. The next 48 hours moved like a storm building on the horizon. Slow at first, then gathering speed until the whole valley seemed to bend beneath its weight. By Tuesday morning, the official notice had gone out. A special county hearing would be held at the Willow Ridge Community Center to address concerns regarding land use, dam safety compliance, and allegations of harassment between property stakeholders. Word traveled fast in a valley this small. By noon, folks at the feed store were whispering. By evening, Even the postmaster asked if everything was all right up on the ridge. And by the time Wednesday rolled around, a line of trucks was already forming outside the community center, engines idling, conversations low and speculative. Sarah parked our truck near the edge of the gravel lot. The lake shimmered just behind the building, quiet and deceptively peaceful, its blue surface rippling with the faint wind that slid down from the Bighorn Mountains. The dam stood farther out, a curved concrete shoulder braced against the weight of a valley's worth of snowmelt. "This place feels smaller than I remember," I muttered. "Places feel small when too many people try to control them," Sarah replied. Inside, the community center buzzed like a kicked anthill. Folding chairs scraped across the floor. Neighbors gathered in little knots, glancing at us then pretending not to. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. The walls were covered in framed photos, construction of Willow Ridge, ribbon cuttings, proud smiles, all the carefully curated history of people who thought the world began when their houses were built. At the front sat the county panel, Chairman Jacobs, who'd been mediating land disputes since before I was born, 2 land use officials, a representative from the Water Board, and Sheriff Halston, filling in for Lionel. Then Bethany Coldwell swept in like she owned the place. Her pink cardigan had been replaced with a crisp white blazer, pearl earrings, and a binder thick enough to be a county ordinance by itself. Her heels clicked sharply as she made her way to the front row, where the entire Willow Ridge board waited for her like loyal subjects. She didn't look at us. She didn't have to. She settled into her seat, smoothed her lap, and slowly scanned the room with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. "Mrs. Coldwell," Chairman Jacobs began once the room settled, "you asked for the floor first?" Bethany rose gracefully, every movement rehearsed. "Yes, Chairman. Thank you." She flashed a tight smile at the audience. "I'd like to begin with a summary of the ongoing disturbances created by the Holloway property." Disturbances. I felt my fist tighten before I realized Sarah's hand was already resting lightly against mine, steadying it. Bethany began clicking through her binder like an accountant presenting quarterly losses. Photos of our ranch road, dust, swirling behind a cattle trailer. A picture of my fence, leaning slightly after a hard winter. An image of Sarah's orange pickup, parked entirely on our land, but captured from the perfect angle to suggest otherwise. "These issues," she explained, "have lowered property values, created dangerous traffic blind spots, and fostered an atmosphere of aggression. Furthermore, we have reason to believe Mrs. Mitchell has used military intimidation to avoid accountability." A murmur ran through the room. Not agreement, just discomfort. I glanced at Sarah, expecting to see anger, but she watched Bethany with that cool, observant expression I'd seen her use during briefings, analyzing, cataloging, waiting. "And lastly," Bethany said, voice dripping with false gravity, "the Holloway property has been the source of suspicious activity around the reservoir. Calls were made to the sheriff's office and water control regarding potential unauthorized access to critical infrastructure." She shut the binder with a dramatic thud. "I urge the county to take immediate corrective action for the protection of Willow Ridge and for the protection of our valley." If she'd bowed, I doubt anyone would have been surprised. Chairman Jacobs cleared his throat. "Mrs. Coldwell, thank you. And now, Colonel Mitchell?" Sarah rose as if she'd been lifted by something steady beneath her. No binder, no props, just a slim manila envelope tucked under one arm. She walked to the front with quiet confidence, the sound of her boots echoing through the hall. "Good afternoon," she began. "I'll be brief." The room leaned in. Even the lake outside seemed to still. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. My division oversees water safety, federal reservoirs, and dam integrity across several western states." Bethany inhaled sharply, as though the title physically struck her. Sarah continued, unfolding a single sheet of paper. I would like to present evidence regarding the Holloway property, and more importantly, regarding Willow Ridge's unauthorized modifications near Hollow Reservoir. She turned toward the panel. First, county maps clearly show that the jogging path, retaining wall, and decorative lights installed by Willow Ridge all sit on the Holloway private easement. They were added without permit, without environmental review, and without adherence to dam-side construction regulations. She held up drone photographs, clear as daylight, time-stamped, geotagged. A collective gasp swept through the room. Second, she said, the HOA rerouted the drainage outlet 2 years ago. This alteration risks diverting spring runoff away from the engineered spillway route and toward residential areas. The water board representative leaned forward, squinting. That can't be correct, he said. It is, Sarah replied calmly. Page 5. He flipped the page. His eyebrows shot up. A sharp whisper escaped him. Good Lord. Bethany stood abruptly. This is misinformation. Our landscaper assured— Ma'am, Chairman Jacobs said firmly, you had your turn. Sarah continued. Third, I obtained sheriff call logs through an information request this morning. Mrs. Coldwell made no fewer than 17 emergency or agency calls in the past week, none resulting in action, all referencing alleged military misconduct that never occurred. The younger deputy from earlier sank into his seat. And finally, Sarah said, her voice steady but unmistakably powerful, I ask the panel to note that Mrs. Coldwell accused me of impersonating military personnel, without evidence, without jurisdiction, and without understanding that I, in fact, help oversee the very infrastructure she claims to protect. Silence. Heavy, dense, absolute silence. Then Sarah lowered her envelope onto the table. Thank you. She returned to her seat beside me. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until she sat down and the room exhaled with me. Chairman Jacobs rubbed his temples, staring down at the documents. Then he raised his head slowly. Mrs. Coldwell, he said, voice low, did you, or did you not, authorize these modifications near the drainage outlet? Bethany froze, her white blazer stiffening as though she were turning to stone. No answer. The entire room leaned forward as one. For a moment, even the lake outside seemed to stop moving, as if the whole valley were waiting for the sound of her voice. But nothing came. Her lips parted, then closed again, trembling slightly. The binder she held so proudly a moment earlier now looked like a weight she could barely carry. Chairman Jacobs cleared his throat. Mrs. Coldwell, the question stands. Bethany swallowed, her eyes darting from the panel to the drone photos, then to the HOA board members seated behind her. None of them met her gaze. Her most loyal allies stared hard at their laps or the floor or their folded hands, anywhere but at the woman who had led them into this mess. At last, she forced out a brittle whisper. I was assured the modifications were minor. By whom? Jacobs asked. Our landscaper. Her voice cracked. He said we had full discretionary authority as long as it didn't affect water distribution. A strange, wounded laugh slipped from the water board representative. Ma'am, the entire point of a dam is water distribution. Soft gasps rippled through the room. Even Sheriff Halston shifted his boots, as if bracing himself for the hard truth settling in. Bethany flared, desperate. We were only trying to beautify the shoreline. Our residents expect a certain standard of aesthetics. Safety, Sarah said quietly, is not an aesthetic choice. Bethany whipped toward her. This is your doing, your manipulation. If you hadn't rolled into town with your special badges and secret intentions. Ma'am, Sheriff Halston interrupted. Colonel Mitchell has been nothing but cooperative. This hearing is about your conduct, not hers." The words landed like a gavel strike. Suddenly, something in Bethany snapped, not violently, not loudly, more like the last thread holding a frayed fabric finally giving way. She lunged toward the panel table, grabbing at the drone photos as though tearing them apart might undo the truth they showed. "This is taken out of context," she cried. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Property values have been dropping. Residents demand action. We needed improvements to maintain appeal." Chairman Jacobs raised a hand. "Mrs. Coldwell, please return to your seat." She didn't. She grabbed another sheet and crumpled it in her fist. "This is an attack on me, on my leadership, on our entire community." She jabbed a shaking finger toward Sarah, who didn't flinch. "She's used her uniform and her status to intimidate my board, my neighbors." "Enough!" Jacob's voice cut through the air like a clean blade. "Sit down." Bethany froze mid-breath, her face flushed, her eyes wild. She seemed suddenly aware of how she must look, standing alone at the front of a room filled with witnesses, clutching torn paper, shaking as her story unraveled. Slowly, almost mechanically, she lowered the paper and returned to her seat. Jacobs turned to the county clerk. "Please enter into record the material evidence provided by Colonel Mitchell and the confirmation from the Water Board. Also note Mrs. Coldwell's admission of unpermitted structural modifications." Bethany let out a strangled sound, something between disbelief and despair. Then came the final blow. Sarah lifted one more slip of paper from her envelope. "This is a log of agency calls made by Mrs. Coldwell in the past 7 days," she said. 17 calls to the sheriff's office, 9 to water control, 5 to county zoning, all claiming either impersonation, structural sabotage, or imminent threat. Sheriff Halston took the sheet, scanned it, and shook his head. Most of these were classified as unwarranted. The younger deputy from earlier sank into his seat again, cheeks red. "Mrs. Coldwell," Halston continued, "your actions created unnecessary panic and diverted emergency resources." Bethany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Neighbors turned toward one another, whispering fragments of disbelief. "I didn't know she was calling that much. She told us she had proof. The jogging path isn't even on HOA land. Did she really accuse a colonel of impersonation?" The HOA board members looked ashen. One man quietly slid his chair away from her. Another woman removed her Willow Ridge lapel pin and tucked it into her purse. Bethany watched them with an expression that would have been heartbreaking if it hadn't been so self-inflicted, realizing too late that the tower she'd built out of bylaws, gossip, and intimidation had no foundation. Chairman Jacobs leaned back, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This council has heard enough," he said. "Our preliminary findings are as follows. All violations issued to the Holloway property are dismissed." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. "Willow Ridge HOA is ordered to cease any alterations within 100 feet of Hollow Reservoir until a full state inspection is completed." Another gasp, this one sharper. "And finally," he continued, glancing at the water board representative, "we are recommending state oversight of HOA infrastructure interactions for the next 2 years." The room burst into whispers. Sarah remained still, calm as a settled lake. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Bethany, however, stared ahead in disbelief. "Oversight," she croaked. "You can't do that. I run this community." "No," Jacobs replied, sliding the drone photos into a folder. "You managed it. There's a difference." Bethany rose, slowly this time, as though every movement cost her something. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "I built Willow Ridge. I kept these people safe. I protected everything they love. By risking the valley, the water board representative asked. By diverting runoff into residential property, by threatening a federal officer? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then, almost mercifully, the room shifted. Chairs scraped. Papers rustled. The hearing was adjourned. But before anyone reached the door, Sheriff Halston paused at the threshold, glancing outside. Well, he muttered, speaking of oversight. The entire crowd turned toward the windows. A white state-issued truck was rolling slowly through the Willow Ridge gate, dust trailing behind it like a warning flag. Someone was arriving. Someone official. And based on the expressions on the panel's faces, someone they weren't expecting yet. The murmurs in the community center died off one by one until the only sound was the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the soft whisper of lake wind sneaking in through the cracked window frames. People drifted toward the glass, craning their necks, peering out like townsfolk watching a rider approach in an old western. The vehicle came to a stop beside the walkway. The door opened, and out stepped a woman in a crisp khaki uniform, hair pulled into a tight bun, badge glinting against the afternoon sun. Young, confident, purposeful. Her boots hit the pavement with the unmistakable weight of someone trained to work in places where one wrong judgment call could drown a valley. Deputy Water Rights Officer, the patch on her shoulder said. Name tag, Emily Hayes. She walked with calm authority toward the community center doors, a clipboard tucked under her arm, far more legitimate than any clipboard Bethany had ever wielded. Behind us, Bethany stiffened like she'd been plunged into ice. Chairman Jacobs didn't move. Sheriff Halston let out a low exhale, somewhere between a sigh and a quiet laugh of disbelief. When Emily entered, the room shifted. Conversations halted. Even the HOA board members straightened in their seats, as if afraid their posture alone could incriminate them. Good afternoon, she said, scanning the room with sharp, assessing eyes. I'm looking for Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. Sarah rose beside me with the calm composure she always carried into a room. I'm Colonel Mitchell. A smile flickered across Emily's face. Quick, professional, but warm. Ma'am, it's an honor. Bethany, shaking, stepped forward. Excuse me, who is this? This meeting is adjourned. We didn't request. Emily turned to her with a level, polite smile that carried the unmistakable weight of someone who didn't have to raise her voice to command the room. Ma'am, the State Water Authority did. Bethany paled. Why? Emily tapped her clipboard. Your hearing triggered flags in our system. Multiple unauthorized alterations near federal water infrastructure, misuse of an HOA easement, unpermitted drainage adjustments, and a recent spike in emergency water-related complaints filed from a single address. Bethany swallowed. A single address? Emily read from her notes. That address being 1440 Willow Ridge Drive. A few people gasped. More than a few turned to stare at Bethany. I can explain, she stammered. I'm sure you can, Emily said professionally. But you'll do so under state oversight. My office has assigned me as the compliance monitor for Willow Ridge HOA for the next 24 months. The room erupted, not loudly, but in a wave of shocked whispers. 2 years, a full oversight term. That's impossible, Bethany breathed. We're a private association. You can't just install someone. Yes, ma'am, Emily interrupted gently. We can, and we have. Chairman Jacobs cleared his throat. Officer Hayes, if I may. What prompted such immediate intervention? Emily nodded. Colonel Mitchell's escalation report. Once a federal officer raises concerns regarding unauthorized modifications to water assets, state review becomes mandatory. And after reviewing the initial findings, she lifted a set of printed photographs, ones Sarah and I had never seen before. We determined this situation warranted immediate action. Sarah leaned toward me. She moved fast. She's not the only one, I whispered back. Emily flipped to another page. Additionally, the sheriff's office forwarded call logs documenting false emergency reports. Those, combined with evidence of witness pressure, suggest a pattern of systemic misuse of authority within the HOA. Bethany dropped her binder. Papers spilled across the floor like broken glass. "I was protecting my community," she rasped. "By violating state water law?" Emily asked gently. "By filing 17 false reports in 1 week? By altering drainage infrastructure with a landscaper?" Bethany's jaw trembled. "You don't understand. I had to keep order. I had to—" "Mrs. Coldwell," Emily said, voice soft but firm, "you tried to control something that was never yours to control." Sarah watched her, not with triumph, but with the solemn recognition of someone who has seen this kind of unraveling before. Then Emily turned back to us, her expression easing. "Colonel, Sheriff Halston asked me to tell you he's grateful for your cooperation. And," she added with a faint smile, "my uncle says hello." I blinked. "Uncle?" Emily laughed. "Sheriff Lionel Cole. He asked me to keep a close eye on this case. Said you two might need someone with a strong backbone and a good working knowledge of water law." Sarah's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You're Lionel's niece?" "Yes, ma'am. He practically raised me. He also told me you were one of the best field officers he ever met during joint trainings." She grinned at Sarah. "Been trying to prove myself worthy of that compliment ever since." Sarah's expression softened. "That was years ago." "Doesn't matter," Emily said. "Good leadership leaves long footprints." Behind us, Bethany sank into a chair, defeated. Her board members sat wide-eyed, stunned into silence. Emily addressed the panel. "Effective immediately, all HOA activities involving land use, water access, or shoreline modification fall under my supervision. Any violation will be addressed at the state level." Bethany whispered something faint, maybe a protest, maybe a plea, but no one heard her. And then Emily turned back to Sarah, her tone lowering just enough to feel personal. "We'll begin our oversight tomorrow," she said. "But for tonight, you two should go home. Rest. The valley's going to be a lot quieter from here on out." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Sarah's hand found mine again, steady, warm, certain. As we stepped outside, the lake shimmered in the late afternoon light. The water looked clearer than it had in days, calm, undisturbed, as though the valley itself approved of what had just happened. Behind us, the doors to the community center swung shut. And somewhere inside, Bethany Coldwell realized her reign was over, and that the very authority she had weaponized was now stationed right next door. Sarah and I walked slowly across the gravel, each crunch of stone under our boots sounding lighter than it had in months. The wind coming down from the ridge had lost its sharp edge. Even the cottonwoods along the shoreline seemed to sway in a gentler rhythm, like the valley itself was settling. "You think she'll leave right away?" I asked softly. Sarah glanced toward Willow Ridge, where the rooftops glowed gold under the lowering sun. "People like Bethany don't leave quietly, but they always leave eventually." We climbed into the truck, and I started the engine. The hum was steady, familiar, grounding. As we drove home along the lakeside road, the dam loomed beside us, solid concrete holding back millions of gallons of mountain melt. The surface of the water gleamed with mirrored streaks of orange and pink from the sky. I'd spent years fearing that if one crack appeared, literal or otherwise, it would all come crashing down. But that night, for the first time, I didn't feel like anything was on the verge of breaking. By the next morning, the valley knew. News in small towns doesn't travel, it accelerates. By sunrise, coffee shops in town were already dissecting the hearing. By noon, 3 neighbors had sent casseroles to our gate, each with a note that began with some variation of, "I'm sorry we didn't know the whole story." At 3 p.m., Willow Ridge's message board, public now thanks to Emily's oversight, posted an official notice. Effective immediately, Bethany Coldwell has resigned as HOA president. The board is cooperating fully with state supervision. All residents are encouraged to attend the upcoming community reset meeting. Underneath, someone had commented, "Can we please go 1 month without someone calling the sheriff over a fence?" Replies stacked up quick. By the end of that week, moving trucks were parked outside Bethany's house. I watched from the ranch gate as her pink cardigan flashed between the doorway and the truck bed. She never looked over at me, not once, but she moved with the defeated heaviness of someone who knows she built her throne on sand and finally watched the tide come in. Sarah joined me at the gate, her hand sliding into mine. "It's over," she said gently. I nodded, though it felt strange. Endings usually hurt. This one didn't. It felt earned. 3 days later, something new began. A community barbecue, impromptu, neighbor-led, and free of bylaws or signature sheets, sprang up on the lakeshore. Kids raced along the bank, skipping stones across the water. Dogs barked, burgers sizzled, laughter carried on the warm wind. Sarah and I brought a cooler of cold tea and ribs. People who'd barely waved at me for years invited us to sit at their tables, told stories about the valley, even apologized for staying quiet while Bethany ruled with a clipboard and a smile that never reached her eyes. The lake glimmered behind them, the repaired spillway humming with the deep, steady thrum of something built right. And then, as if fate had a sense of timing, Emily Hayes arrived. She parked her white truck near the water and joined the crowd with a stack of new compliance pamphlets tucked under one arm, but she didn't pass them out. Not yet. She walked straight toward us. "Colonel, Mr. Holloway, mind if I join you?" Sarah pulled out a chair. "You're always welcome." Emily sat, uncharacteristically relaxed. "The state finalized everything today. Oversight officially begins next week. But honestly?" She glanced at the families laughing along the shoreline. "I don't think we'll need much enforcement. When folks feel safe, they follow the rules on their own." I looked out over the valley, across the water, the hills, the fences, the sunlight flickering through thin mountain air. My father had fought for this land, poured his life into it, and in the end he'd been worn down by the same kind of force Bethany tried to use on us. But tonight, the valley didn't feel heavy. It felt alive, open, possible. Sarah leaned against my shoulder. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "Feels like the first real peace in a long time." She smiled, turning her gaze toward the water. Reflected sunset danced in her eyes, gold and blue and quiet. When the last of the barbecue crowd drifted home, we lingered at the shoreline. The lake lapped gently at the rocks. A soft breeze swept the scent of sage and pine across the valley. And for the first time in decades, the ranch didn't feel like something I had to defend. It felt like something I got to share. I picked up a scrap piece of wood from a supply shed and carved a simple sign. When I finished, I propped it into the soil beside our front walkway. Holloway Valley, a peaceful community, established 2024. Sarah laughed softly when she read it. "I like that." "It's true," I said. "Peace didn't come easy, but we earned it." She slipped her hand back into mine. "And we'll keep it." Together we watched the colors fade across the water until night wrapped around the valley like a warm quilt. No sirens, no shouts, no accusations, just the steady breath of a place finally free of fear. The valley didn't need a war. It needed truth. And someone brave enough to bring that truth into the light. If this story hit close to home, drop a justice in the comments. Or tell me, would you have stood your ground like Remy and Sarah? Out here, the land teaches us one thing. Truth doesn't shout. It stands firm. And if you want more real, slow-burn HOA and ranch revenge stories just like this, go ahead and subscribe. I'd love to have you back on the porch for the next one.